Ek Omkar Satnam Sri Guru. As a very wise black person, my mother taught me a lot about how to manage um, racism. Not directly, because we didn't grow up in the South. I grew up in Los Angeles, one of the most liberal states in the country for a long time. But there were still subtle forms of it, as well as overt forms of racism. They didn't have any signs that said colored only or white only here in California. But there were feelings that you could just own, that I could own as a child, about racism. And little things that were unspoken, but I guess growing up, you just sort of learn from what the elders say around you, how you should be careful, um, and how you don't want to act as though you yourself are racist and only want to be with black people, because that was never how I grew up at all, and it wasn't what I experienced in the schools that I went to um, from the time of the fifth grade on up. But there was a sensitivity, and it's probably that protective mind that wants to make sure that your nonverbal actions speak the reality of who you are, you know? So, for example, I remember riding the bus, and if there was a bus when I was again a teenager, or I would see an empty seat by a white person, empty seat by a black person. And though the empty seat by the black person might be closer to me, I might pass it to sit by the white person just so that neither would know that I was prejudiced or think that I was prejudiced, you know. Um, I also remember times when my mother would grab my arm and pull me back from something that she thought might anger a white person at that time. And rather than put me in danger of whatever they might do, she would pull me back. You know, she never said anything about it. I never asked a question about it, but that nonverbal communication was clear. I remember when we moved from South Central Los Angeles in the black neighborhood. I was 9, and we moved to a place in Los Angeles that was all white neighborhood practically. And the school that I went to, elementary school I went to, was then almost all white people, of course. And uh, and we had a very big house, a beautiful house, a lovely lawn. Oh my God, it was so different from my little dirt backyard and all these things that I grew up with. And my friends on the block were all white. And so they were happy to play with me, and I'm happy to play with them. We had no problems. When we were talking to each other about what our life was like, I remember thinking that, wow, I wonder if we become rich. If that's why we're here, because we became rich, you know? And I had to, in my own imagination, what I thought rich people's lives were like. I thought they had breakfast, lunch, supper, and dinner, you know, and that supper was like at 5 or 6 o'clock, and dinner was at 9 o'clock, with candles and all of that stuff. So I remember talking to my girlfriend down the block, 2 doors from me, and I'd say, well, we have supper at 6, and we have dinner at 9, thinking that's what everybody had. They looked at me so strange. They just say, what? You mean you have dinner twice? And then I began to wake up and say, well, maybe they're not that different after all. That maybe it's all in my mind. And it never, it never was occasion for me. Then again, I had white boyfriends, I had Japanese boyfriends, I had black boyfriends. My friends at school were all mixed. A lot of them were actually black people, but a lot of them were not. So growing up in California, where there were no signs, there was always an awareness, particularly because there was a silent boundary that you didn't cross, you know, and that those who crossed the boundary though I didn't notice it as a child growing up, but those who crossed that boundary, either working on the other side of Central Avenue, or whatever, they were often harassed and often suffered tremendous problems. In 1960, I was traveling with my mother and my business manager. By this time, I was 20, and I was a dancer and performer in the theater. And I was taken on by this beautiful man, white man, who would bring big events from various countries to the United States. And somehow he caught a hold of me and he figured I had something to offer, so he wanted to help cultivate that. And we were driving to Havana, Cuba from Los Angeles in my little Minx car. And we took the southern route because my manager had lots of friends in Havana, Cuba at this time. And he could get lots of costumes made and musical arrangements done and pictures and all sorts of things very, very inexpensively. So driving through the South was my first experience of what it was like to be in a segregated country. Mother and I were drivers, and we stopped at all the best motels for the night. And my manager would go in there and tell the hotel owners, these are not Negroes, these are Cubans. And they said, oh, wow, that's all right then. As long as there's Cubans, they can stay here. There's niggas, I couldn't stay here, but there's Cubans, they can stay here, you know. And so my mother and I would just be very quiet about it, and I had a little high school Spanish that I could throw out there, and the rest of it was all fake. Squama, squama, squama. Ah, see, squama, squama, squama. Oh, no, no, see, see, squama, squama. We get inside the motel and fall out laughing. We just roll on the floor laughing at the stupidity. That's stupid. No sense whatsoever.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
stupid. It was just stupid.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah,
Now it wasn't. It was no less painful. Very painful to have that experience. To not be able to go into a restaurant. To have to go to the back and relieve yourself in some horrible, nasty place of a garage or something. I mean, it was painful. It was embarrassing. It was angering to me. I got angry. My mother had to keep my arm pulled by her side so I would do something or say something that would get us both in a world of trouble.